5-Star Founder is a podcast created by founders for founders. I believe everyone you ever meet knows something you don't. Each episode features a founder from a variety of backgrounds, sectors, entrepreneurial stages, with whom I hope to learn, celebrate, understand, and get a deeper insight into their world. We will cover everything from what drove our founders to start their company to what keeps them awake at night, biggest regret to date, as well as their career highs and lows in their journey so far. Anders is an exception for two reasons. One is because he's our first non-UK founder we have had on the show so far. Also, I was super keen to get him in because although the parent company of Novicell UK has been going for 20 years, 20, that's older than Google, Anders pulled a proper Viking move on us, and he set up Novicell here in the UK in 2016. Like a lot of the founders I've been speaking to, he pretty much had to start from scratch. So I'm keen to understand his biggest wins, challenges, learnings he's had so far. How initially he moved to the UK in 2013, where he was working for another company. I'm also keen to understand how he adapted to local customs, ways of doing business here, as compared to his native Denmark. The learnings he's had from hiring a team to a sizable number and growing. It seems like, every time I look on LinkedIn, either they're hiring or they've got new starters. So things must be going well. And I'm going to grill him about that. He enjoys watching football to pass the time. So my first question has to be obvious, Anders. How has the nation of Denmark been coping with possibly the second biggest tragedy to befall her since the petition to delay the World Cup 2018 in order to allow Lord Nicholas Bentner to recover from his injury was denied? Welcome to the show, Anders.
Thank you. That was a good one. I like that.
I actually have a very soft spot for Denmark because I did an exchange program in Roskilde.
Okay.
So I spent a lot of time in your country getting to know the people, the culture, the ways of doing things. I have some Danish friends who, I keep in touch with. I have a very fond memory of your country. So I've always had good things to say about everyone I've met from Denmark. Hopefully you won't change that. So firstly, could you tell us who you are and what you do?
Sure. So my name is Anders and I'm the CEO of Novicell UK. I am from a small town, or I don't think you would even call it a town in the UK. It's probably more like a village up in the northern part of the mainland in Denmark. So very far north of Germany, all the way up to the tip. That's where I'm from, a little village with 3,000 people.
Wow.
My father had a supermarket and his father had a supermarket.
Oh, wow.
So that's just a little thing.
What's the name of your town or the city you're from?
It's called Sindal.
I'm a geography nerd, so I love discovering these things. And when I was actually in Denmark, I did a fair amount of traveling across Jutland, Aarhus, went to the Legoland there. So I have a pretty good idea of the geography of your country. You also speak German, or do you speak German?
It depends on how many pints I've had, I think. No, it's I speak a little. So in Denmark, when I was in school from 7th grade, so only for 2 years, you had to have German classes. So it wasn't much I had of German. However, I also carried on into college after. In Denmark, the school system is a little bit different than it is in the UK. But so I've had it for school for probably 4 or 5 years. So I do understand a lot of it, and I can also speak a little bit. But I wouldn't say I speak German
because you actually used to work for a translations company. That was your immediate past before Novicell, where you, I guess, grew the company. Well, you grew from your role in Denmark to Scandinavia to UK. Is that how that transition happened from your country to the UK?
Yes, I've always worked in sales. So when I was done with the school system, which is the first 10 years, I actually took an optional 11th year in school. Then I had some college afterwards, which what we call it in Denmark. In my case, it was business college because I have 2 older brothers that did the same. And my father had done the same kind of thing as a guy running his own supermarket. And I worked in various sales jobs. I started in stores to work in a store, and then I worked my way up. And ultimately, I worked at this translation company where I set it up for them in Denmark. It was actually a UK company I set up in Denmark this time.
Yeah. I want to go back to what you said. You mentioned your family has been in the supermarket business. Was this something that your grandfather actually set up by himself, or how did that actually happen?
My grandfather had a small supermarket, probably would just call it a small store back then, but he had that back in the days. It was, for example, under the occupation in Denmark, so under the Second World War and stuff like that. My father, when he wanted to go into the same trade, he moved to a different small village where he joined the one shop in that village, and that's where he met my mother as well. Then eventually they moved to another village and started up their own supermarket. And that's the village I'm from. So that's how it started.
Is the supermarket still going?
It is not open anymore because he got such a good deal for selling it that he could not resist it. My father always had a plan to either sell it or to pass it on. And it actually happens. My oldest brother is actually doing exactly the same. So he could have taken over. He's now running a supermarket for another company, but in a different town or far away from there. So it wouldn't make sense. And my father didn't want to pass on the burden, as he called it, to my brother.
Oh, wow.
And by that, he means having to work many hours.
Yeah. One of my favorite books I've read is a book called Made in America by the person who set up Walmart, Sam Walton.
Okay.
And it was very eye-opening because it's an industry or a company or style that set up that I just wasn't familiar with. And you realize exactly how much hard work goes into opening shop, dealing with actual members of the public, which is always like either infuriating or like you see people in the queues who are just assholes. And you're like, what the hell? You want to like slap someone in the face or something. And obviously I don't have the patience to be able to do that. So yeah, shout out to anyone who works in the street stores. You got my sympathy.
I agree. Mine too.
And like you mentioned, you worked. I mean, I guess was it your first job? Like you worked in the family business. Like, could you tell us a bit more about what did it motivate you to actually think, oh, this isn't for me? Was it always like in your family?
It's a good question. So I started working in the shop. The first job I had was weighing potatoes and putting them into smaller bags. You get those big sacks of potatoes with the 25 kilos, and then you could measure some of them, put them in a small plastic bag, put them on a scale, and put a label on them. That was the first job I had. And then eventually I moved on to delivering groceries at people's doorstep. We did that on a bicycle, one of those that they call a long john. It's actually with a big, it's like a truck in a sense, the opposite way.
In front of the bike, there is a basket thing. Yeah, Christiania bikes or something like in Denmark.
That's probably why. That's exactly inspired the same way, but it's the same. It's as you explained there, you could have a lot of groceries in front of you, but some years ago, the Christiania bike was made for more like to have people on instead. So the Long John bicycle is, I just Googled it here. It is a thing that had a capacity to up to 220 pounds. For bicycle. I guess there are different models, but we had that one. It was an expensive one. I remember my father told me, and we used that. And once I started that part of the job, I was delivering like that. And we had my friends worked in the store doing the same, delivering groceries for people. And that was a service level you expected and you got back then from your local shop.
You probably wouldn't have known the difference, but was that your first kind of experience of real hard work, actual kind of manual labor?
It most definitely was, because I think I see myself as, I guess, pretty spoiled, or by my mother especially. My father was the tough guy in the family, and my mother was the very nice woman to her 3 kids, a very nice one. So we were, I guess, a little bit spoiled, but we were also a very different family to my friends' families, because they went on holidays and stuff like that, and we didn't, because they worked all the time.
I mean, I guess it was like the way I imagine this, please correct me if I'm wrong. Is it like you were the only store or the supermarket in the village or the place?
Actually not. There was a lot of competition in that little village. 3,000 people. I don't know what qualifies it to be a village or whatever, or town, but it was not big. But there was actually at least 2 to 3 stores or shops it was always competing against. And one of them was a big, well-known countrywide chain. So
Netto?
Not Netto, but that has been there since then. But it was a bigger one, even more well-known one that was just next to my dad's store, by the way.
Oh no!
So, but it was always been good. It was just growing, and so again, the service, I guess, that's what you compete on, or you competed on back then as well.
I want to go from this. So you working within shop, and you went to school, and then you mentioned you went to this kind of business school. Like, was that like an apprenticeship or something?
No, it's on the level where people don't know really what they want to do in their lives. I think that's a common thing in the youth. And I just did the same as my brothers did. So I went to this business school. Again, I was, how old have I been then? Maybe 15, 16 years old when I joined. So
Hmm.
I wasn't that old. And then I did 3 years there. I just had some basic stuff, basic marketing, basic accountancy and stuff like that. And then what the next step for me was the real education I got was when I then joined an apprenticeship after that.
Hmm.
So after that in Denmark, you either go to university, which is probably lower than 50% that go to university. I don't know what the number is, but I think it is anyway. It's of the people I know, by far, the most of them would go and find a job, especially when you come from a small village. I joined a company where I started selling TVs and stuff like that, so electronics. And that apprenticeship was for 2 years.
How did you decide sales was the thing for you? Were you at your business class and you thought, you know what, I want to be close to, like, was there something in you that made you always think, I love being around people, I love negotiating? What made you realize sales was your thing?
I think that was just working with my dad all the time. It was not the hard work I thought of all the time that I could do. I didn't think of that, by the way, to be honest. But I was trying different functions within the company. So I ultimately, after delivering groceries and stuff like that, which I also did by car later on, I sat by the register and putting that in. But that was not the funny part of it. Of course, the most funny part was to have conversations with the customers, which was very friendly. You would speak to every customer, you would know who they were, etc. You have stories, and that was the service level. But besides that, I was also looking at the revenue. And already back then, you're looking at, and the computer had already, by the time I sat by the register, we had a computer system in the office where you can go to the screen and see the revenue, where we at, and control F5 and check how much is on now and see. And that was, for me, just having that target was interesting.
So you're quite motivated by actual kind of challenges, I guess, and you kind of set yourself your own goals. I want to go back to your, like, working for your family, as so many of us have probably done. It's a completely different dynamic to when you're out on your own and when you've got actual real world targets to hit. Did you kind of enjoy that kind of challenge in a way that you're not working for your family, but you're working for someone else and you're being judged on actual numbers and results that you'll deliver?
I think the numbers and me having to perform on specific targets was only happened a long time after that. So that happened when I joined the apprenticeship in a soft way. But it was but I quickly found the motivation in it. That's for sure. I probably also, I don't know. I don't have any education within psychology or anything, so I cannot tell you where it comes from. But because probably a joint thing between working with my dad and seeing how business is run, but also the fact that I did a lot of sports in my youth. And with that as well, you also comes a lot of competition, and that was team sports and stuff, but it was also competitive. But I had targets from almost day one when I started working in real life after working with my dad.
I started life in sales and recruitment myself. In a way, sales is probably the ultimate psychology master's degree that you can do, because you got to understand who you're talking to and what their motivations are. So Translate Plus was the company that you worked for. I mean, I guess that was your first foray. What you mentioned just before we came on air, that you took a UK company and took it to Denmark, and I guess that was your first experience of dealing with a UK-based business. How did that come about? And also, I want to learn more about the journey, because you went from setting up Denmark, and then you went to Scandinavia, and then you became a director, and then you came back to the UK.
Let me quickly go through it. So after I did my apprenticeship within selling electronics, I moved on to a competitor, Bang & Olufsen, you might have heard of, also selling electronics. I did that for a couple of years as well. Then I moved on to selling telecoms in the equivalent of a 3 or a Vodafone shop to other businesses. And that was when I started working with B2B. I wanted to become a salesperson that was driving around. Back then, when my dad had his job, we had all these classic salespeople coming and selling different sorts of brands. That was back in the days, the tradespeople that came up and, oh, look at these new products we have from their suitcase. So I had that dream as well, but of course, already back then it was phasing out. But I ended up having the responsibility of having my own business-to-business center for one of these phone providers in Denmark. And then after that, I moved into what nowadays is called cloud backup service. Back then we called it remote backup. There wasn't this fancy cloud word. So we did backups for company servers and stuff overnight and made sure that if anything was crashed, we could go. So that was just to finish that off. I did that also for a couple of years. But my very important experience I had with the last company I worked with, this cloud backup, was when I really truly learned cold calling. And cold calling has since been a discipline that I was really successful with in the coming year and in those years after that. And it was simply because I was sitting next to two people that were so extremely skilled in this discipline, and that I learned how to do it by using a proper script, of course, but also seeing numbers I've never seen before. So I thought maybe you could do 20 phone calls a day or something like that. And then suddenly I saw people doing 60 and booking 4 meetings a day and stuff like that. Yeah. They were brilliant at it. So I learned a lot over those couple of years. Then what happened was that I had a friend, and that's what often happens, have happened in my life, is that I had a friend, a guy that I played football with in Denmark, moved to the UK. I only played football with him in 1 year, but we clicked very well. So we were friends and we spoke over the phone once in a while. He always said, you know what, one day I'll hire you. And then one day when his company, Translate Plus, had grown to a size where they needed to start up in Denmark, then he approached me and said, now is the time. And then ultimately he hired me. And my job was to start selling translations, something I've never heard of before. And to do that, and I remember the co-owner, there was 2 owners, the other guy, the English guy, Robert, also a brilliant guy. He came over to my flat in Denmark, sat down with me and explained to me how the whole industry worked. And then I just started cold calling from my bedroom. And it ended up with, back then I think we were 8 or 9 employees. It ended up with, first step was then we got an office in the city of Aarhus, where I lived in Denmark. And then I had 5 or 6 colleagues in that office. And then I was offered this position to head up sales. I gradually took over in Scandinavia, and then they wanted me to come over to the UK and take over as sales director. And that was because my friend, who is one of the owners, he had taken that role himself and wanted to just move to the next step so he can be the CEO and spend more time on strategic stuff. So give me the keys for the store, so to say. So I got that job, and so, but just going back to your question about to work with a UK company. So although he was Danish, they were very UK-ish or British in a way, where everything was very formal. So in Denmark, it's very informal. It was very formal. And they were almost to the level of pedantic on certain things. You couldn't make spelling mistakes. You couldn't put whatever. Everything should be spelled the right way, and all communication should start by saying hi, blah, blah, with a comma, and all these things I wasn't used to. I was used to much more informal tone, but I liked it because I always liked having structure. And I quickly thrived in that environment. And that was probably also why I did all right there. And sales-wise, in Denmark was by far the biggest country outside of the UK after that. And we worked with at least half of the top 20 companies in Denmark by the time I stopped. So it was very successful, but yeah.
So during this time, were you kind of managing the sales team in Denmark, or did you also have people in production and project management? Or
yeah, I had everything. So I started with just doing sales, and then I ended up having product managers as well. And so in the translation industry, you have product managers doing the most of the client communication in the day-to-day. So I had a couple of those, and I had some salespeople as well. So it was, there was more stuff to it than just sales. But then when I moved to the UK, I was sales director. So I had to, of course, take care of a bigger team, take care of the team that used to be my colleagues. So now I was their boss. But yeah, so that was...
Yeah, I think it was quite a short time where you progressed from country manager to actually running Scandinavia, from according to your LinkedIn. How did you adjust from having to manage yourself to now actually managing other people? And what were the challenges around for you?
So I had tried a little bit before to manage people, but it was different. This, of course, also because we were in the same place, the same office. But I think that I could talk forever about how it is to manage people.
I'm trying to get some tips from you.
One of the most important things there is with managing other people is that when you are good at some things and you hire other people to do the same thing, then you just have to accept to delegate and to accept that the quality will not be as good as you can do yourself. And that's I think the most people that are managers will say the same, that it's the most challenging things to accept that. But once you accept it, that is where you can grow, and that's where things can go very quickly, because it cannot be the same. And also it's about acknowledging where you don't excel yourself and have to get help from others. That's the next very important thing by running a company, for example.
The other podcast I recorded earlier this week, we talked about that exact same thing, where how much are you willing to let go in order to live with the fact, okay, it's never going to be as good as how you would do it, but are you willing to kind of accept someone else's interpretation of it? And also at the same time, the moment you kind of start meddling into production and sales, you're kind of taking time away from what you're being paid to do, which is to have a look after the whole thing. From that kind of logical step for you, and then you kind of manage bigger and bigger teams. What were your most key learnings from that time?
No, but that's probably where in my life where I still look back and I learned the most. Maybe in my youth, of course, with my dad, but also in this time with two brilliant directors, the owners of the company, who are now still my friends. But the funny conclusion to that story was that I was fired by them in the end.
Oh, wow.
So, and that's the thing, because they set up a business with a clear target, and that was to sell the company after X amount of years, which they have succeeded with very well indeed, by the way, made a good amount of money on that. I was hired to be a sales director. I was the best salesperson, and as many times before in history, the best performing person within whatever field gets promoted. So I was promoted to be the sales director. The previous sales director, or the owner who was dealing with the sales, his way of dealing with management is very different from mine. So I think back then it was micromanagement. And so it didn't go that well, because you're taking the best salesperson away from doing what he was best at to help the other guys excel. However, I spent probably more time on answering questions from the owners saying, why don't you do like this and this? So, which was fine, because that was their way, because they were so close to everything. They did everything themselves from day one. They didn't borrow a single pound for starting up a company, and it's still running today, and it's the biggest translation company in the world. So they've done extremely well. They are really skilled people, but it didn't work like that. And ultimately, based on how it was going and what I was doing, if you only look at salesperson, the tricky thing is, of course, always targets and revenue and stuff like that. And I was not measured on that anymore. I was measured on the company, and the company did very well. I also got a proper pay for that work. And I think ultimately they couldn't see the value of that. And then we disagreed on how it should carry on. So I ultimately got fired. And this wasn't the biggest down time of my life, by the way, but it was fine. The biggest competitor just came to me and said, just write your job description and you can start tomorrow. So it was very easy to
You went from that company to another translations provider, where you were the head of sales or the business development director from my research. Again, you must have had to make some adjustments to the culture of your previous company. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
I went to this other company where I spoke a lot with the owner, who was a fantastic guy, and I knew another guy. It was actually a customer of mine when I worked at Translate Plus that then moved over to this company. So one of my biggest customers moved over to this competitor, and he was the one who wanted to hire me. So I started working there, and I also did, I think, very well in the time I was there. But and it was different. Yes, it was different. It's always difficult when you come from one company to another when they're very close. You start comparing and you start saying, why don't you do like this? And I'm for one who speaks up. So I probably divide the oceans, as we say in Denmark. So some people hate me and some people love me, but that's how it is. I'm down to business when it comes to business.
It's like sometimes if you bring in someone from a completely different sector, they come in with a fresh kind of blank canvas. Whereas if you bring in someone who's from a competitor or something, they bring in a lot of kind of not baggage, but ways of doing things that they've had, and no one's right or wrong.
No, of course not.
Fact, isn't it?
But I always think I'm right, so that's a challenge. No, I of course came in, but they had a great company as well. It was different in many ways, so there was some pros and cons for both companies, of course. But I came with the stuff I had, And I had a good run there. I was hired to do a role that was then removed when they hired new people. And then I did sales purely in Denmark after that. So I went back to doing what I originally did at Transit Plus, which I did successfully as well. But I was bored. I was so bored. So by that time, because that industry is very small industry and it's the same discussions, there's not much development. It's the same kind of thing. It's the same things. If I went in there now, it's probably the same things they're talking about. So for me, it was a little bit boring. I wanted to get out of the industry, and I had started to work with the companies like Novicell, where instead of just selling translations to companies big, then we talked a lot about how to integrate to different software. So typically content management systems where people produce their websites, and so they can easily, by automated processes, translate websites by human beings, by the way, into several languages. So that was what I was dealing with. And when I was speaking to these companies, I found out, and this is just how I saw it. It was in Denmark, and everyone I spoke to, all these partners, I thought they were arrogant. I thought they were arrogant, all of them. And I thought, if they can do well in an industry being arrogant, what can you do if you're humble?
Yeah.
So that was what led me to move industry to another industry.
So a new challenge came about. I mean, I think from like just listening to you and also from my research, it seems like you kind of like challenges where you kind of push yourself, and the moment you kind of get bored or you kind of sit still, you're probably looking for the next one. I think Novicell are actually from Aarhus, right? Maybe how did they first come about in your radar, and how did that kind of discussion start from you working for that translations company to saying, hey?
It was a mix of luck and timing. So when I lived in Aarhus, just like the other guy, the guy who hired me at Transit Plus, who I used to play football with, there was the guy who owns Novicell I used to play handball with, which is another sport I used to do, another team sport. And both of them, I just knew, of course, I knew them from playing the sport and having a beer after the match, but that was it. They never worked with me before. So I would say that they're good at judging characters, but that's my conclusion. But this guy who owns Novicell, he by coincidence reached out to me and said, by the way, in London at an Adobe conference, I haven't seen you for 10 years or something. Should we meet up in a pub and have a pint? And at exactly that time, I had just spoken to some of my closest friends about, I want to move into this industry. And I was thinking about how to start it up. And then he came along. So it was just like the perfect timing. And the first thing he said, after we had the first couple of sips, he said, I hope you're going to ask me for this. Yes. Do you want to start it up in London? And then that was, yeah.
So this kind of conversation started really like 10, 15 years before you even actually were kind of given that contract, I guess. But what I want to know is the Vikings came to this country 300-400 years ago. They sent their best sons to say, hey, go and take over this market. How did that conversation happen? Because I was researching Novicell, where they do have a presence. So they have, I think, about 330 people or something like that. And you do have like these kind of companies in Spain as well as other parts of Europe. But it seems like UK is one of your biggest markets. What did they identify about the UK? They thought, okay, we need to have a presence here.
I think a whole book could be written about our CEO and my boss, because the guy is a brilliant guy. And the reason why the success is there is because of his human skills, I would say, to a far extent. I don't think it was him looking particularly at UK as a market and saying, I've been doing a lot of research, I think we should start in the UK. I think he's doing as he's always doing. He has a fantastic intuition. And he was looking at, I think this guy is a good guy. I think he can do something good. And I actually tried to do it the same way. Going back to what I mentioned earlier, the success of what we're having now in Novicell in the UK is, of course, partly due to what I've been doing, but mostly it's about me being able to find the right people. So all the people are the ones doing the great work. And it's at the best skill you can have is to be able to find the right people. And that's going back to what we talked about before about skills, but it's also about finding someone you can trust, et cetera, et cetera. So what he did was just, he found me, he knew I was there, and then he said, you know what, let's do this. I'm sure, and I know, he hadn't done a big SWOT analysis of the market or big competitor analysis or anything like that, or not at all. So we do it differently today because we've matured as a company. However, that's his way of doing it. And I would say I've done the same. in my life, I've hired some people I know. Sometimes it's not worked out. I'm still friends with the people. That's nice. And it is a tricky one, but it is about finding the right people to surround yourself with. And I think that's what he did.
In a way, he kind of followed his gut instinct. And a lot of business founders I speak to, they kind of tend to be very insecure about just going on a whim. Could you tell us a bit more about that? Like how and why one should follow what the gut tells them?
Yeah, but that's what I do all the time. And if you look at, we do DISC assessments. I don't know if you know them. It's personality profiling when we hire people just to see how they fit into the team and so on. And it says, if you look at mine, it says I would be a good decision maker if it wasn't for the fact I'm led by emotions. So I'm technically not a good decision maker, and I can honestly say I am. And it's easy for people that are around me to tell you that's the case. But I think it's also what has led me to success is that once I find good people, I will hire them. Our CEO does. When we looked at new companies to open for Novicell, he would be looking at where to find the right people. Of course, we're looking at markets nowadays. So we look at the markets nowadays and we see there are some options. And then when we find the right person, we just opened in, or not just, but I think it's half a year now ago, we opened in Amsterdam. And that was, I know they were also looking at other countries, but then they found the right guy in Amsterdam, and then here we go. And it's about that.
So you spoke with your old handball teammate. You got the, I guess they were like, okay, just open this market. What was the first thing you had to do, or like and who was your first hire in the UK?
So I actually started up with another guy who's not in the company anymore. So he was the technical guy and I was the commercial guy. So we were on the same level, and we started up. We didn't know each other at all. I met him once in a cafe, and my gut feeling actually told me right away there would be a clinch there. So I was right about that as well. I remember I went back to my wife and said, I think there'll be trouble there along the way. So I was right on that one. But what happened? We didn't have anything. Back then, Novicell didn't have any. They just acquired a company in Spain. There was a small company that they worked with. So they didn't have any experience in this at all. So it was from basic, and I didn't have any industry knowledge. So I had to start selling Google SEO or paid search or even websites for that matter. And I had absolutely almost no clue about any of it. And so I started just in the beginning, I started listening to podcasts and I started looking at articles, and I at some point figured out its way. The train has left. So I just need to find my own way of this.
Sometimes when we as sales or someone who started has a lot of knowledge within sales, the skills are transferable, really, because it's never about the actual product. It's all about the need of who you're talking to. I know you kind of get a gut feel for this. One question I want to ask you, has your gut, like you mentioned, the first person that you brought in to Novicell didn't quite work out. Has your gut feeling been really wrong sometimes? And how did you kind of adjust yourself so that if you ever saw that kind of thing happen, you'd kind of know what to do?
I didn't get him in, by the way. I don't want to have that on my record. I was paired together with him. So we were.
Okay.
But the first guy I hired after that, I believe, is the guy you also know, who's just left us. So, but I also hired people that didn't work out. I've hired many. And probably they were disappointed, or I was disappointed, or whatever. That happens as well. I think the most thing that you can say where I might be very different from other people is that I like trying stuff. I am full of initiative. And our CEO is exactly on my wavelength. He's actually written a book. I think I should give this to you one day. You should try and read it. It's only 2 hours to read, but it comes with a lot of his way of looking at things. And it's very down to earth and with examples of real scenarios. And it's about not complicating stuff in general. And I'm the same. I don't like complicating stuff, and I would rather try something or not to do it. So he has a saying called, it's better to do an offensive foul than it is to hesitate. And I think that's the best translation I can give you. It's actually from handball. So when you have the ball and you're in attack, if you just pass it around and you don't do anything, the ref will just blow his whistle and the other team gets the ball because you're too passive. So it's passive play pretty much. And his saying is, it's better to do an offensive foul than to do nothing.
In the one I have in my kind of book, I have all my quotes and stuff, is indecision is better than wrong decision. And we're actually setting up a sister company as we speak. For weeks, we've been discussing internally as a team, okay, what should we name the company? You can have a nice name, but then you go to GoDaddy and you're like, what the hell? You can't get any
Yeah.
of these domains. So we drew it down to 3 or 4. One, the whole like team hated, and everyone I spoke to was like, oh, this is a bit lame. And I was like, okay, give me a better suggestion and then we'll go with it. And yesterday I got a WhatsApp from my colleague saying, okay, I found a name. And within 10 seconds, I just said, okay, just buy it. Let's just move on and we can make that and kind of see it to its conclusion. Another thing you mentioned was you're quite an emotional kind of, you make a judgment based on emotions. How have you become better at coping with that? Or is it something that you just get used to?
I don't think I make decisions based on emotions, but I just can be very well influenced by emotions. It can interfere with my decision making, I guess, in maybe a not a rational way. So it's not a big problem, by the way. It's just something I looked in this personality profiling, and found funny in a sense, because it's true as well. But I think that's also the beauty of it, because sometimes you do stuff because you think that it could work out. Like when I hired some of my friends that didn't work out, but I've also hired my friends that did work out. So it just leads to different situations. I've tried things where it was not good, like worst cases were hiring friends that didn't work out, but a lot of great cases as well.
This is something I noticed about myself as well, where I tend to, especially when it comes to decisions that impact like small things as well as bigger things, where I tend to think, okay, emotionally, but then I try to rationalize myself and think, okay, I want to do this, but then I look for evidence to kind of back up my decisions. So it's something which I've noticed about myself.
That's the problem with me. If it's a problem or challenge, that is that I make decisions like this. So I'm in a conversation with someone, then just make a decision in there. So I never hesitate. So I do the opposite. I do maybe a lot of offensive fouls, but I don't hesitate ever. So I never take too much time to think about something. That never happens with me. So in that sense, I'm not strategic at all, but I make calls right away just to move on next. So, and that's where sometimes you can make a decision right there, which is maybe not wasn't the best, but at least then we are on with it and we don't spend more time on it. So I think that's both good and bad. I don't have those, I'm not worrying too much about it. But if I was slower at making decisions, I would worry much more than I already do, by the way. And that's enough.
Antagonize, and your cache in your brain is actually kind of occupied to that, whereas that could be better used in better things. Apart from hiring, what was the first decisions that you made for setting up Novicell in the UK? And if you could go back, would you make the same decisions again?
If I could go back, we would not have wasted 1 or 1.5 years to begin with before we started figuring out what we should do. But again, everyone in Novicell have learned from our case. So nowadays there's a whole plan for when you start up in a new country, etc., etc. So we learned a lot, and me including. So yes, I would do different things very differently. So the thing is that, what did we do first? In the first 1.5 years, I did as they told me I should do. They were the experts, and also a lot of great things, by the way. It's not that I'm saying it's wrong. I spent my time on something I shouldn't have spent my time on in the beginning, most, if I look back at it. And that's again about, it's better to get the right people in from beginning. So I wasn't in the position to say, by the way, hire 4 new people, because it wasn't my money. Ultimately, I own 20% of the company in the UK, and it wasn't my position to ask for that.
Okay.
So I didn't do that. And I don't know if I thought of it either, but I did a lot of stuff that I shouldn't do. So even I was doing the website, I was setting up our own website. And we do websites, and we're very good at it, and we can have content people to do that. And I was doing that. So a lot of stupid things looking in hindsight. So that's why I'm saying that we wasted a year or 1.5, but maybe that was also good learning for me to understand how everything worked before I moved on.
What was the best decision you made since setting up here? Because the journey that you've had is the kind of things that a lot of founders have been discussing with me, where you've had to start from scratch. Yes, you may have had a company behind you, but that, to be honest with you, like a Danish company coming into the UK, sometimes it doesn't mean anything. It could even be a hindrance, because companies here don't know anything about a new player coming in. So you've had to kind of establish that. Like, what was the best decision you think you made retrospectively?
I think it has been way easier for us than it would have been if I had started up myself. First of all, I didn't have to worry about money. And I think that's, as an entrepreneur yourself, you would know that if you're any kind of entrepreneur, you would worry about money when you start up a new company in the beginning, at least until you're profitable. So I didn't have that worry. And that also, probably going back to my decisions, are a little bit faster. But I am very focused on money as well. So that wouldn't be, but the best thing that happened was actually when the partner I had left the company. And it's a little bit harsh to say, but that was the best thing for the company, because he was on a different page. We had two different ways of looking at what this should be and how you should work and everything. So having two people that fundamentally disagreed on how things should be run. So once he left, then it was easy for me to start making decisions. And then I just started making decisions, because then I could do it myself. Then I hired people where I thought I should hire people to come in and join. And it worked out pretty well.
For the Novicell guys in Denmark, like, they kind of speak to you. We're talking when you first started the company here, where you set up things here. What was the biggest culture shock for them? Like, were there things that they didn't expect you to come back to them with?
I think there's a big difference in the market, of course, pros and cons of what worked. So in Denmark, again, everyone is a little bit more friendly towards each other, at least in that particular town or city or whatever you're in. And it's a little bit more down to earth, where it's a little bit more formal here, but everything is also bigger. The companies are bigger. There's just a more formal way of doing things. Also, the whole thing from an admin perspective is, if you ask the guys in Denmark, probably say a nightmare, because everything here is still papers and letters and stuff, whereas in Denmark, it's been digital for years. So if I created something, whatever, a company number, I would get everything digital right now. The same as nowadays, we talk about vaccines and stuff. There's no need to have any passport, because everyone has their own account in the health system. They can just go in and show it on the app. They've had that for years. So in that sense, that's been difficult for them to figure it out, but they figured it out. And of course, we've just found some partners that can help us with that, if you like. But business-wise, I think there's a lot of pros as well they've seen, and especially the economy in the UK. The fact that because you are surrounded with a lot of successful businesses, that people are willing to pay for value. That's the big plus side for our company. Also, that of course, living in London or having a company in London, you have a lot of talent at hand. There's a lot of pros as well.
This is a very interesting thing you mentioned. How do you identify customers who appreciate the value rather than just hire you because you are the cheapest in the market?
I think this is my sales thing, and that's why I still run the sales in our team, even though I have 4 salespeople today. Is that that's my core competence, and I strongly believe also why we didn't sell much in the beginning is that I'm not a keen believer in selling. I don't want to sell anything I don't believe in myself. When we sell the services we offer, I believe we're the best at, or at least in the top range, or else we shouldn't be doing it, or else we need to get to that stage. So value is number one. So it's all about value. So when we go out, what we do is we sell websites, we sell software development, apps, IT architecture, and a lot of marketing. And it's all about being able to show the customer that we're adding value. That's mostly done by KPIs for every customer. Whatever they're doing, and none of them don't know what it is, I always want to talk about that, and talk about that before I start talking price. So going back to the question about pricing, yeah, I've been used to that for many years, but I don't want to talk about price until the very, very end of a conversation. Because first of all, we need to agree on if you want to buy something from me or not. And then we can talk about the price in the end. You see my point? Because there's no need to start discussing a rate if it's not about that anyway. I think we've all been there in sales where you started where you started throwing rates back and forth, and then it ends up. But even though you go to the fantastic rate, they say we decide on someone else, and that's because you didn't do the sales process right. The sales process is about finding out, are we aligned on this? Am I offering what you want to buy? Yes. Do we agree that if the price is right, then we'll make a deal? If you have that ticked off, then once you have that confirmed, then we'll talk about the rates. Then we'll agree on the rates. I've never not been agreed with anyone about rates, so that should be simple.
In a way, you compete on value. Go with us, and then we will give you X and Y, Z more, or even you kind of channel that conversation.
It's a very broad subject, but I can give you an example. When we started selling websites, you probably know this yourself from whenever you created a website, customers would come and say, oh, we need X, Y, Z. How much does it cost? And then that happens a lot because people go into a mini RFP tender process. They ask about this, and they probably give you, let's say they give up, some even give you 5 bullet points. Some people give you 2 Excel sheets filled with details and stuff. But 99.9% of the times, it's not enough. I don't know what I'm quoting at. So I could interpret this in this way, and you can interpret it in another way. And then ultimately you'll have 2 quotes where it's all about the rate, because the person who's sending the RFP or tender material, they think they have told what they need, and they just understand what they need, so they'll just give them the price. So what we did in the beginning as well, we offered this, and then afterwards companies would come and say, while we were building a website, they would say, oh, by the way, I thought when I said this, I thought it meant this. And we would say, oh, we thought it meant this. And then it took us until probably 2000 and early 2019 to conclude that we do not work with companies without knowing 100% what they need. And that is something we do via workshops. So we go and have workshops to find out exactly what they need. When you're building a website, there are many small parts in it that you need to be specify exactly. So it's just so crucial to be aligned to have success and add value, because the only way you add value is if you meet the expectations or exceed them. And to do that, you need to make 100% sure you're aligned on what it is the customer wants. And you cannot know that because someone just, and they do it in good faith. They put down 10 bullet points. I want this website. And then they're seeing it for them, right? But I cannot interpret that. So we do workshops these days. Those workshops, we sit together with stakeholders, whatever project we're on, and then we define clearly what it is they need. We talk about customer journeys. If it's for a website, what do you want to achieve with the website? What is the end goal with it? Oh, we don't have any end goal. We just need a nice website. But also, surely you must need something. Oh, yeah, it would be nice to get some people asking for a quote. Okay. And then we start putting KPIs to everything so we can measure success. And I think this is key for what we're doing. And this is just about websites. It could be about everything else. When you have a new customer, the first thing we do is sit down with the customer and say, okay, thank you very much. We now have the collaboration. Let's talk about it. Where do we send the invoices? How often should we have a status meeting? Blah, 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 blah. To set expectations. And then we document it in a central place so everyone knows what we have agreed on.
Oh, wow. I've not come across this kind of workshop kind of thing before. Could you tell us a bit more about that? Was this something that you took on from Denmark, or was that something you came up?
It was based on, we also do digital strategy. And that's, of course, very high level stuff to help companies with this. So where the website could be one part of it. But we did this, and we had a guy who probably had the opposite education that I did. So he probably went to school for 20 years and didn't work anywhere. So he was all theory. So he went to a customer meeting with me once. It was one of our colleagues. And he started talking about all this. I will call it flower power, because it's me. It's not something I know what it means. You have not specified what do you mean by this. You're just talking fancy buzzwords and whatnot. And then I went back to the most brilliant guy we had in the Danish office and said, surely there must be a better way of explaining what this is, and then just putting a number on how much time does it cost to find out, and how much money, and when can we do it. And then this guy came back with another idea to this. And then since then, we've adapted this over here because I've managed to hire brilliant people that were able to take it the step further. So nowadays we do it this brilliantly for every customer. We have fantastic case studies where the customer says it's fantastic success. When you deliver websites and stuff like that, where there's a lot of unknowns, you often hear about IT projects costing more money than you originally thought they would cost. But we don't have any, touch wood, we don't have any unhappy customers I've had since then, where we build websites or anything for, because we're so aligned on everything. That's like the biggest breaking point, what you call strict with just going by the Bible or going with our way of doing things. And if the customer doesn't understand it, I would rather, when we pitch for something, sometimes we could spend 10, 20, 30, maybe 50 or 100 hours even on pitching. And then I would rather spend time on a workshop, which takes, the standard workshop for website takes about 35, 40 hours. I'd rather take that, put that investment over there and make sure that the customer knows exactly what they want, because that's what they will tell us afterwards. And then they should actually take that document and go to tender with, and then ask we've done this before, we advised them to do this. And sometimes they've gone with someone else, and that's fine, because we know now at least they are starting on the right. When they get a quote from us and the other company, we're quoting for the same. It's not two different solutions that in my mind is one solution, and it's a different. Everything is described down to the detail. That's very interesting. And this is just for one thing. It could be for design, or it could be for, in your case, video content creation, putting plans together. But it's ultimately the same. Every time you need to find out what is the message you want to portray, what are the end user, what are you trying to achieve? All these things you talk about, you document them down. And then from there, you create all, that's probably how you work anyway, but you just document it in a way where you do it together with the customer. And the great thing about working together with the customer is that you speak together and you bond together.
Yeah.
So there's so many wins to this. I can only recommend it as much as to any other company.
I'm going to try replicate this because I think especially during lockdown, we have more time to actually get in front of
Yes.
people like yourself and actually say, hey, what's going on? And that probably provides for a much richer, even if they were not to go with you for that instance, that
Mhm.
relationship or that kind of establishment of that actual professionalism probably demonstrates a lot more about you as a company than whoever you're competing against. So,
I certainly hope so, and I can share something with you afterwards because a big success in this quiet period, if you like, where we haven't been able
mm,
to see people in person, because that was the first obstacle we came across. Oh,
mm,
what are we going to do now? We're going to wait. That was March last year. We're going to wait till April or
mm,
May to have these workshops, and then we started doing them online, and they are more efficient online.
mm,
Because you don't spend all the time on chit chatting, which,
mm,
by the way, we would prefer to go back to, but because we cannot. But the instead of putting up post-it notes on a
mm,
wall, we now do it in something called Miro board, which is a super cool tool where you interact with the customers as well. You work collaboratively on the same project, and it's easy afterwards to do the notes and everything as well, and go back
cool.
to it and see what you actually discussed back then. So what we do when we're done with the workshop, by the way, is the conclusion is a battle plan, we call it. So that's whatever it is we're talking about,
A
then we have
Viking
that
analogy
ultimate.
there, Anders.
There you go, there you go. Then we have the battle plan, and then you're ready to go. So that's the thing. I'm a strong believer in always being very specific. So
Mm,
that means that when my old colleague was trying to sell a workshop, he couldn't tell how much it cost or anything to the customer. He just
mm,
talked about all this flower power, whatever fluffy things. And then when we started being down to business, saying it costs you this much, you're going to get this out of it,
mm.
and etc., then we started selling it, because then
Wow.
people know what they're saying. They can just say yes to it, and we can start on Monday.
Does that kind of thing ever prompt the customer to think, we didn't even realize what we needed until we had this? Or you kind of articulated things that they wanted in ways that they didn't even think it was possible?
All the time, because you also have to bear in mind, if you are, again, I'm referring to a website because it's just an easy example for me,
Mm,
but if it's a website, let's say it's typically one person
mm,
who's drafting together a tender material or RFP, that person will have to go internally and ask for information. That information can be that one person is solely responsible of taking that information, putting it into what the
mm,
requirements. But what we do is that we come from the outside, and we don't come with any old legacy, whatever thoughts or about how things should be done in the company. And then we come there, and we just taking neutral into it, and we're asking questions and letting them talk about it, coming up with ideas, and then ultimately we're gonna propose something, and then of course they need to say accept, and they agree, and then we have a plan. Then we
wow.
can start. Then we can start scoping out what we need to do to get to these different points.
I mean, I guess that even saves you from actually, because once you've done the workshop, that probably progresses the sale so further on in the sales cycle.
It's the best thing you can ever do. So when you do sales courses, which I did many years ago, the first thing you learn, when I was selling mobile phones in a shop, you have to ask, okay, so what you're telling me is that you want a phone that's blue? Yes. What you're telling me is that you want it to have a camera? Yes. That was back in the days where
Yeah.
that was an option. Or whatever it is, you need to align with the customer. And in this case, you are doing exactly that with the customer. So if I'm a little bit cheeky, I would say they're paying us to sell them something,
Yeah.
but it's in their own interest to do it, because their requirements, it's not just I want a mobile phone, it has to be blue and it has to have a camera. That's not, it's bigger things we're talking about. And where, regardless if it's a marketing campaign or it's a website, there's a purpose of it, and you need to drill down to that purpose and find the different customer journeys in this case to find out, and then you need to figure out how you get there, and then you need to find out how you measure on the success to then afterwards deem it a success or not a success. And
Wow.
this is crucial, because then we help people. The people we sell to are not normally the CEOs of the company, or maybe not even the whatever that below the CEO, but
Mm,
what we help them with is creating business cases, and this is
mm,
also essential. So what do you want more? If you want to have more money for your next video content production or your next website, then you need to show why you want that. And that's what we
mm.
help them with. So we also help them with actually offering them to write the business case for them.
Creating a business case for yourself so that one, your price is justified, they know exactly what you'll get, and it kind of furthers the sales cycle so much further. Because I've worked in SaaS sales before, and a lot of what you've said, I think it's, initially when you speak to the customer, they only say, okay, we want to create X. And you're like, why do you want to do this? And then why do you want, you kind
Mm.
of understand from
Yeah.
there. I think that's a topic that we should discuss in its own right. What's the future for Novicell UK?
Good question. And I think that goes back to a lot of people have a lot of plans with a 5-year plan or 10-year plan. I never had one. And maybe that's stupid, some people would say, but I live by the day. So I get the most out of each day instead. What is the plan? The plan is to keep on having a nice company where we are enjoying working together, having fun. That is the core values of the company. While we're still making money as well. While we make money, we can also have fun. It hasn't been that much fun the past year, but I hope that once it opens up again, we can go on our trip to Barcelona with the whole company, which we were supposed to go on last year, and do more fun things together and pay the staff back. So what will happen for us? Yeah, today I think we're 32 employees in the UK now.
Yeah.
We're looking for 4 or 5 new people right now. So I would just say if we can keep our culture there, which has been difficult the past year, but we're trying also with remote, but keep the culture there, keeping true to our values about having a company where we have fun together and do something we're proud of, then I'll be happy. And then, of course, growth is a key to that, but it's not about if we're 40 or 50 or 100 people, about having fun and being profitable for me. So obviously I'm also driven by money, but like any other person. But if I just have enough to get by and take care of my family, I'm happy. And then if I could do the same for all the employees, then fantastic, win-win.
Wow. How can people get in touch with you if they wanted to connect with you?
Either via LinkedIn, I guess you can share the details.
Yeah.
LinkedIn, or they can call me, or they can email me if they have anything to discuss. I'm always open for discussions with people. As you say as well, you can learn from any person you speak to. That's also why I'm keen to network normally, go to networking events and stuff like that, just to speak to people. There's always something interesting. And bear in mind how my career has progressed only because of, in a sense, network.
And now more so than ever, I miss actually real life events and meeting people and having a drink, which almost any salesperson will tell you is the key to getting what you want to get or creating that relationship. Thank you so much for your time, Anders. I do hope we will see you very soon. I think from my side, I got so much out of it. I've got a whole notebook full of inspirations, ideas I'm going to try and implement into my business. So thank you very much for that. And we wish you all the best.
Thank you. You too. Take care.